The exact hour of Alexander's birth has been lost to history. But history, as we all know, often reveals itself through stories people choose to tell. Legends have it that before his birth, Alexander's mother, Olympias, dreamed that a thunderbolt struck her womb. It was later interpreted by ancient scribes as a sign that the child was destined for greatness. Another legend has it that on the very day of his birth, the great temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was burned to the ground. Later, ancient archivists would joke around that the goddess Artemis was absent because she was attending the birth of Alexander. No witness remains to confirm the truthfulness of these legends, but the fact that people believed them matters more than the fact that they happened. But from the very beginning, the moment Alexander was born, the ordinary seemed insufficient. Alexander was born into a world already shaped by ambition. His father, King Philip II of Macedon, had transformed a kingdom once dismissed by the Greeks as backward and uncivilized into the most formidable military power in the region. Through reform, discipline, and war, Philip had achieved what few thought possible. He had united much of Greece beneath his influence. Alexander grew up watching this transformation unfold. At the age of 13, Alexander was placed under the tutelage of Aristotle, arguably the greatest of ancient minds. For 3 years, the greatest philosopher would teach to the greatest warrior of antiquity. But of course, our subject, as extraordinary as he is never fully explained by knowledge alone. Ancient accounts tell us that Alexander kept a copy of Homer's Iliad close at hand, seeing in Achilles not merely a hero, but an example. To him, greatness was not a gift bestowed by the gods. It was something to be pursued, something to be earned. Long before he crossed into Asia, long before empires fell before him, Alexander had already become consumed by a question that would shape the rest of his life. What does a man have to do to be remembered forever? The world would soon discover the answer. In 336 BCE, the course of Alexander's life changed in a single moment. The question that had occupied Alexander's mind for most of his youth was suddenly confronted by reality. King Philip II, having transformed Macedon into the dominant power of Greece, was assassinated during a royal celebration. The circumstances remain debated to this day. As with so many events surrounding Alexander, history offers facts, but certainty remains elusive. What is certain is that a kingdom suddenly found itself in the hands of a 20-year-old prince, and kingdoms are rarely patient with uncertainty. Across Greece, old rivals sensed opportunity. Along Macedon's borders, enemies prepared to test the resolve of its new ruler. Many believed that Philip's empire would die with Philip himself. Their predictions, sadly, were wrong. Alexander moved with a speed that would become his signature. Challenges were answered before they could mature into threats. Rebellions were crushed before they could spread. Doubts were eliminated before they could take root. The most famous example came at Thebes. When the city rose against him, Alexander marched south and destroyed it. Its walls were torn down, its people were killed or enslaved. The message was unmistakable: resistance was extinction. By the age of 20, Alexander had secured his throne, subdued Greece, and established himself as the unquestioned master of the kingdom his father had left behind. For many rulers, such achievements would have marked the successful beginning of a reign. For Alexander, they merely removed the first obstacle. Beyond the Aegean Sea lay the Persian Empire, the greatest power of the age, whose territories stretched across 3 continents and whose wealth seemed almost inexhaustible. It was an empire that generations of Greeks had regarded with a mixture of fear, admiration, and resentment. To most men, it would have appeared a challenge beyond reason. To Alexander, it appeared as the next chapter of his destiny. Finally, Alexander crossed into Asia in 334 BCE. What followed would permanently alter the course of history. The Persian Empire, long regarded as the greatest power of the ancient world, fell before him. Its armies were defeated, its territories absorbed. Its ruler, Darius III, was reduced from the King of Kings to a fugitive in his own empire. By any reasonable measure, Alexander had succeeded. The question that had accompanied him since his youth had now been answered. His name was known across continents. His victories had surpassed those of every king who came before him. The immortality he had sought was no longer a distant possibility, but an emerging reality. Yet there is something peculiar about ambition. It rarely recognizes its own fulfillment. For most men, the conquest of Persia would have represented the culmination of a life's work. But for Alexander, it appeared merely as another horizon crossed. Beyond Persia lay new lands. Beyond those lands lay others still. And so he continued east. What had begun as a campaign was becoming something else entirely, a pursuit without a destination. For nearly a decade, Alexander's advance seemed unstoppable. Kingdoms had fallen, empires had vanished. The boundaries of the known world had been pushed ever farther east by a man who appeared incapable of accepting limits. But conquest imposes burdens not only upon the conquered, but upon the conqueror as well. By the time Alexander reached India, his soldiers had marched thousands of miles from their homes. They had crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers whose names were unknown to them only years before. They had fought for so long that many could scarcely remember a life before war. Alexander, however, remained unchanged in one important respect. He still wished to go farther. His army, unfortunately, did not. When he demanded that the march continue eastward, his soldiers refused. It was not an act of rebellion, nor a challenge to his authority. It was simply the acknowledgement of a truth that Alexander had spent much of his life attempting to outrun. Every man has a limit. For the first time since beginning his great campaign, Alexander was forced to turn back. Not because he had been defeated, but because there was no one left willing to follow him beyond the edge of the world. Alexander turned back from India, but the journey was already taking its toll. For nearly 13 years, he had lived on campaign. He had crossed deserts, mountains, and continents. He had survived battles that should have killed him and undertaken ambitions that should have defeated him. Yet history has a habit of reserving its most decisive victories for no one. In 323 BCE, while in Babylon, Alexander fell ill. The precise cause remains unknown. Ancient sources offer competing accounts, and the centuries have provided no final answer. What is certain is that the man who had conquered the greatest empire of his age could not conquer the frailty of his own body. He was 32 years old. The conqueror who had spent his life pursuing the edge of the world had finally encountered a frontier he could not cross. Within days, he was dead. Empires, unlike men, do not mourn. They simply move on to whoever is left standing. Alexander had named no heir, only an empire too vast for any one man to hold. His generals turned on each other, each convinced he was the strongest Alexander had spoken of. The wars lasted for decades. By the time they ended, the empire he built in 13 years had been carved into pieces by the men who once called him friend. It did not outlive him by even one generation. And yet something did survive. Greek language, art, and thought took root in lands that had never known them. Cities bearing his name rose across 3 continents. The world he left behind was not the world he had inherited. Centuries later, a young Julius Caesar stood before a statue of Alexander and reportedly wept. He had reached an age at which Alexander had already conquered the known world and could not help but compare his own accomplishments to those of the Macedonian king. It is a remarkable image. 3 centuries after Alexander's death, one of history's greatest men stood in the shadow of another. His empire was gone, but Alexander remained.